The marble floors of the Capitol building caught the morning light in a way that made everything feel heavier than it should. Daisy Morgan stood at the podium, 25 years old, wearing a black leather vest over a pressed white shirt. The Hells Angels patch on her back, the phoenix and iron cross seemed to glow under the chamber lights. She cleared her throat, and the microphone carried the sound across rows of senators and representatives, journalists and cameras, all waiting. She looked down at her notes, then passed them into the faces of people who would decide whether her voice mattered today. Some of them saw a young woman with a law degree and a mission. Others saw the vest and had already made up their minds about what kind of person wore leather into the halls of government. But Daisy had learned a long time ago that the people who judged fastest were usually the ones who had never been cold enough, scared enough, small enough to understand what it meant when someone finally showed up. Her hand moved to the small scar on her shoulder, a habit she'd never quite broken. The tissue there was smooth now, 17 years of healing, packed into skin that remembered what a wooden bat felt like when it came down on a 7-year-old body. She took a breath and began to speak, but her mind was already pulling her backward, away from the marble and the cameras, away from the prepared testimony in the political theater. Back to snow and gasoline. Back to the night when her life split open and everything that came after poured through. Back to Christmas Eve 2024. Montana in December doesn't apologize for its cold. It settles over the landscape like a living thing, patient and absolute, turning breath into fog and skin into something that aches just from existing. Interstate 90 stretched black and endless through the night, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through white fields and skeletal trees. The kind of road where you can drive for an hour and see nothing but your own headlights throwing shadows against the dark. The gas station sat at a lonely interchange, the kind of place that survives on truckers and travelers too tired to make it to the next town. Its neon sign flickered in a pattern that suggested it had been doing this for decades and would keep doing it long after everyone currently alive had turned to dust. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed with the particular frequency of places that never really close, never really open, just exist in a constant state of waiting. Behind the building, pressed against a humming vending machine that coughed out warmth from its mechanical guts, a little girl named Daisy sat with her knees pulled up under a thin summer dress. The dress had been yellow, once bright as sunshine, but months of wear and weather had faded it to something closer to old paper. Her sneakers were soaked through the canvas, dark with melted snow, and her bare legs had gone from pink to an alarming red that would have sent any responsible adult running for blankets and hot chocolate. But there were no responsible adults in Daisy's orbit anymore. There was just her, the vending machine, and a tattered teddy bear missing one button eye and most of the stuffing from its left ear. She held the bear against her chest, fingers buried in its worn fabric, and listened to the sounds filtering through the wall. Men's voices, rough and loud. Laughter that didn't sound like it had anything funny behind it. The kind of noise that made her small body pull tighter into itself, trying to take up less space in a world that had made it very clear she was surplus to requirements. 3 months ago, she had lived in a house. It wasn't a good house, not by any measure that mattered, but it had walls and a roof and a door that locked. Her stepfather, Robert, had been a drinker, the kind who started mean and ended meaner, whose hands became weapons after the sun went down and the bottle ran dry. But at least there had been a bed. At least there had been the pretense of structure. Then Robert's temper had finally found the line even he couldn't uncross, and Daisy had made the calculation that 7-year-olds shouldn't have to make. She'd chosen the winter streets over the closed fist. She'd chosen uncertain cold over certain violence. She'd been on the road for 3 months. 90 days of sleeping behind dumpsters and under highway overpasses, of stealing food from gas stations, when the clerks weren't looking, of learning that most people would step over a small, shivering child rather than ask questions that might require action. But it hadn't always been like this. 6 months before the gas station, before the running, before Robert's final explosion of rage, there had been her mother. Margaret Morgan, though everyone who'd known her in the old days called her Maggie. She'd had hair the same dark brown as Daisy's, and a smile that could make you believe things might work out even when all evidence pointed the other way. She'd also had cancer, the kind that moved fast and mean, that didn't care about single mothers or little girls who still needed bedtime stories. Maggie had died on a Tuesday in June in a hospice bed that smelled like disinfectant and failure. Her last words to Daisy had been whispered, her voice already half gone to whatever place people's voices go when their bodies stop working. Baby girl, she'd set her hand impossibly light in Daisy's grip. If you ever get scared, if you ever need help, and there's nobody around, you find someone with wings on their back. Phoenix wings, remember, they're family even if they don't know it yet. Daisy hadn't understood then. She'd been too busy trying not to cry, too busy pretending she didn't see her mother fading in real time. But Maggie had reached into the bedside table with shaking fingers and pulled out something small and worn. A photograph edges soft with age and handling. In it, a younger Maggie stood next to a tall man with a wild beard and kind eyes, both of them wearing black leather vests. On the back of those vests, even in the faded photo, you could see the design, a phoenix wrapped around an iron cross. His name is Bear, Maggie had whispered. William Harrison. If something happens to me and you can't find anyone else, you find him. He's good people, baby. The best kind of people. Then she'd press something else into Daisy's hand. A small leather vest, child-sized, worn soft as butter. It had been Maggie's when she was young, before Daisy, before Robert, before the cancer, before everything went wrong. Keep this safe, Maggie had said. It'll help you remember who you really are. 3 days later, Maggie was gone. 2 months after that, Robert's drinking had turned Daisy into a runner. And now here she was, 3 months into winter, pressed against the vending machine, clutching a bear with one eye, and wearing her dead mother's vest hidden under her thin dress. The voices from inside the gas station got louder. Daisy's fingers tightened on her bear. She'd seen those 3 men before. A week ago at a different gas station 2 towns over, they'd cornered her while she was trying to fill a water bottle from a bathroom sink. They'd laughed at her dress, at her bear, at the way her hands shook. Then one of them, the tall one with the scar across his eyebrow, had grabbed her bear and thrown it in a trash can. Daisy had fished it out after they'd driven away, but the memory stayed fresh. The casual cruelty of it. The way they'd looked at her like she was less than nothing, like she was just something broken that someone had left behind. She'd learned their names from listening to them talk. Dylan, the tall one with the scar, Travis, stocky and loud, always fidgeting. Kyle, quieter but somehow worse, with eyes that calculated damage before his hands ever moved. Now they were inside and Daisy was out here, and the cold was seeping through her clothes in a way that made her wonder if this was the night she finally just stopped being warm at all. Then she heard the motorcycle. It wasn't the high whine of a sport bike or the cultured purr of something expensive. It was a deep, rumbling thunder that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. The kind of sound that announced itself miles before arrival, that made windows rattle and dogs bark, that separated the people who loved motorcycles from the people who feared them. Daisy peered around the edge of the vending machine, curiosity temporarily overriding caution. A massive Harley-Davidson rolled into the parking lot, chrome catching the fluorescent lights, its engines settling into a low idle that sounded like a heartbeat made of machinery. The rider swung his leg over with the careful movement of someone whose body had racked up a lot of miles and wasn't shy about reminding him. He was old. Not grandfather in a rocking chair old, but weathered by decades of road old. His hair slicked back from his face had gone steel gray. His beard was full and white, shot through with the last stubborn streaks of the darker color it used to be. He wore a black leather vest over a thermal shirt, and even from her hiding spot, Daisy could see the patch on his back. A phoenix wrapped around an iron cross. Her breath caught. Her hand moved instinctively to the small vest hidden under her dress fingers, tracing the same design through the fabric. The man stretched his back, cracking audibly, then reached up to pull off his riding gloves. His hands were huge, scarred across the knuckles, with tattoos covering both arms and sleeves of ink that disappeared under his shirt. On his right bicep, she could see a skull, designed the kind of detailed work that had taken hours in a chair and years of meaning to commit to. He moved like someone who'd learned to be careful on ice, each step deliberate. He was limping slightly, favoring his left leg. Daisy watched as he pushed through the glass door into the gas station, heard the clerk's muffled greeting, saw him move to the counter. Inside, William Bear Harrison cradled a paper cup of coffee that cost too much and tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the previous administration. The warmth felt good in his hands, though. At 68, he'd learned to appreciate small comforts. Hot coffee, a bike that still ran, roads that went somewhere. This was supposed to be his last ride before winter settled in for good. 43 years he'd been wearing the Hells Angels patch. 43 years of brothers and sisters in leather, of long highways, and longer nights of a life that most people didn't understand, and he'd stopped trying to explain. His wife Sarah had died 15 years ago on a Christmas Eve, not much different from this one. Black ice and a moment of inattention, and suddenly he'd been alone in a way he'd never quite learned to fix. She'd understood the life had even ridden her own bike for a while, but she'd also wanted things he couldn't give. Stability. A husband who came home at 5:30, grandchildren who didn't grow up thinking their grandfather was some kind of criminal. They'd had one daughter, Emma, she was 35 now, living in Seattle with a husband Bear had never met, and two kids he'd only seen in pictures Emma's sister had shown him at Sarah's funeral. Emma had decided 10 years ago that having a Hells Angels member for a father wasn't compatible with the life she wanted to build. She'd asked him to choose, the vest or her. He'd chosen the vest, not because he didn't love her, but because taking it off would have meant erasing 43 years of who he was, and he didn't know how to do that without erasing himself in the process. So here he was, 68 years old, drinking bad coffee at a lonely gas station on Christmas Eve, carrying a letter in his jacket pocket that he'd written to Emma 6 times and never sent. The letter that said all the things he couldn't figure out how to say out loud, that he was sorry, that he missed her, that he understood why she'd left, even if it still felt like losing an arm, that he was proud of her anyway. He paid for the coffee and a tank of gas, nodded to the clerk, and pushed back out into the cold. That's when he noticed the pickup truck at the far pump. 3 men leaning against it, breath fogging in the air of postures, radiating the particular kind of tension that came from too much alcohol and not enough sense. Bear had been reading body language for 4 decades. These 3 were trouble looking for a target. He decided to give them a wide berth, mind his own business. Get back on the road. He'd learned a long time ago that not every fight was worth having, and at his age, fights cost more than they used to. He was halfway to his bike when the wind kicked up stronger than expected. The coffee cup tilted in his hand, and a splash of hot liquid arced through the air and landed squarely on the boot of the nearest man. Bear stopped. "My apologies," he said, voice calm, hands already moving in a placating gesture. Wind caught it. No harm meant. The man looked down at his boot, at the spreading brown stain, and something ugly twisted across his face. Dylan Garrett had been having a bad week. Hell, he'd been having a bad year. The meth operation he ran out of his cousin's garage was barely breaking. Even his girlfriend had left him for someone who actually had prospects, and he was 3 drinks past the point where consequences felt real. And now this old man, this leather-wearing dinosaur, had just disrespected him in front of his boys. "You think that's funny?" Dylan said, voice already rising. "You think you can just toss your shit on me and walk away?" Bear kept his hands visible, kept his voice level. "I think it was an accident, and I already apologized. How about I buy you a new pair, and we call it even?" But Dylan wasn't hearing it. His friends Travis and Kyle straightened up, sensing entertainment. In their world, you didn't let disrespect slide. In their world, strength was measured by how willing you were to hurt someone who couldn't hurt you back. Travis moved first, a hard shove to Bear's shoulder. Bear stumbled, his bad leg almost buckling. He caught himself, but then Kyle was on his other side, another shove, this one harder. Bear's boots lost their purchase on the ice and the world tilted. He went down hard, his hips screaming protest as he hit to the frozen ground. The Harley, still on its kickstand, but unbalanced by his fall, teetered for a moment before gravity made its decision. 800 pounds of motorcycle crashed down, pinning Bear's leg beneath its weight. Pain exploded white-hot through his knee and up into his hip. The air left his lungs in a rush, and for a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the crushing pressure and the cold seeping through his jeans. Through the haze of pain, he saw Dylan pick up something from the bed of the pickup truck. A baseball bat, wooden, the kind that had seen a lot of use and none of it recreational. Dylan stepped closer, the bat rising, and Bear understood with crystalline clarity that he was about to die in a gas station parking lot on Christmas Eve because some drunk kid couldn't handle a coffee stain. He'd survived Afghanistan. He'd survived 40 years on the road. He'd survived losing his wife and his daughter and most of the men he'd called brother. And it was going to end here, pinned under his own bike because of an accident and bad timing. The bat hung in the air. Dylan's face twisted into something that might have been a grin, and Bear closed his eyes. That's when he heard the voice, small and high and absolutely terrified. "Don't hurt him. Daisy didn't plan it. There was no moment of decision, no weighing of options, no careful consideration of consequences. There was just the sight of the bat rising and the man with the phoenix on his back helpless beneath it, and her mother's voice in her memory saying, "Find someone with wings." She burst from behind the vending machine like something launched from a slingshot, her thin dress whipping around her legs, her bear clutched in one hand. The three men turned, startled by the streak of movement, and then she was throwing herself across Bear's chest, spreading her arms as wide as they would go, as if her small body could somehow shield all of him. Her heart hammered so hard it hurt. Her breath came in sharp gasps, but she didn't move. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. She held up her bare arms, shaking, offering it toward Dylan like a bargaining chip. "Please take my bear. It's all I have. Just don't hurt him." She looked up at Bear, then at his white beard and shocked eyes, and something in her chest recognized something in him. The vest, the phoenix, the face that looked different from the photo but still somehow the same. "Don't hurt my mama's friend," she whispered. Bear stared at her, at this tiny shivering child who just put herself between him and a weapon, at the desperation in her eyes and the way her whole body trembled, but she didn't move away. And at those words, "My mama's friend," Dylan hesitated. The bat still raised his brain trying to process this development. This wasn't part of the script. You didn't hit old bikers with kids involved. That was a line even drunk rage understood you shouldn't cross. But momentum was a cruel thing. He'd already committed to the swing, already put his weight into it. He tried to pull back, tried to redirect, but physics didn't negotiate. The bat clipped Daisy's shoulder and back as Dylan yanked it away. Not full force, but hard enough. Hard enough for her to cry out the sound muffled against Bear's leather vest. Hard enough for Bear to feel her small body jerk with the impact. Hard enough for something fundamental to break inside the old biker's chest. Bear roared not in pain but in fury. His free arm came up and caught the bat on its backswing, his hand clamping down with 40 years of grip strength behind it. He yanked hard, pulling Dylan off balance, and somewhere in the scuffle, Travis and Kyle realized they'd just crossed a line that was going to have consequences. In the gas station window, the clerk's shaking hands finally found the phone. At the far pump, a trucker raised his cell phone and hit record, capturing the image of a little girl curled protectively over an old man, while three grown men decided whether their entertainment was worth the felony charges that were suddenly very much on the table. Tires squealed as the pickup truck lurched backward, Dylan jumping into the bed, Travis behind the wheel. They were gone before the first sirens started wailing in the distance, leaving nothing behind but exhaust fumes and a child still sobbing against Bear's chest. Bear forced himself to breathe through the pain. His leg was on fire, his hip felt like it had been hit with a hammer, but none of that mattered as much as the little girl shaking against him. "Hey," he said softly, his big hand coming up to rest gently on her back. "Hey, little one, you're okay. They're gone. You're okay." She lifted her head, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. Dark brown hair hanging in tangles around a thin face, eyes too old for 7 years, a healing bruise on her cheek that made his jaw clench, and recognition flickering in her expression like she was looking at a ghost. "You knew my mama," she said. It wasn't a question. Bear's chest went tight for a different reason. "I might have," he said carefully. "What's your mama's name, sweetheart?" Daisy's hand moved to her dress and she pulled at the neckline, revealing a small worn vest underneath. She wrestled it off her movements, clumsy with cold and shock, and held it out to him. Bear took it with hands that had started shaking. It was a child's vest, Hell's Angels design on the back and written in faded marker on the inside collar. Maggie M. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Maggie, Margaret Morgan. 20 years ago, when they were both young and stupid and convinced the road would never end, she'd ridden with them. She'd been fierce and funny and had a laugh that could light up a dive bar. She'd also been the closest thing to a sister Bear had ever had that wasn't blood. More than that, if he was being honest with himself. There'd been a brief window before she'd met David when Bear had thought maybe they could be something else. But she'd fallen for David hard and fast, and Bear had stepped back because that's what you did when your sister found happiness. You didn't complicate it with your own feelings. Then she'd gotten pregnant and disappeared. She'd called once about 6 months after to say she was okay, she was out, she needed to build a different life for her kid, and then nothing. 20 years of nothing. 20 years of wondering if she was safe, if she was happy, if she ever thought about the family she'd left behind. "Your mama was Maggie," he said, and his voice came out rough. Daisy nodded. "She died. Cancer. She said if I needed help, I should find a man with phoenix wings. She said his name was Bear. She said you were the only one she'd trust with me if something bad happened." Bear closed his eyes. The universe had a sense of humor, apparently. 20 years of wondering what happened to Maggie, and here was her daughter bleeding and shivering, who just saved his life because Maggie had told her to find him. "I'm Bear," he said, "and your mama was one of the best people I ever knew." The police arrived in a wash of red and blue lights, then the ambulance paramedics moving efficiently to check both of them. Daisy flinched at every touch, but she wouldn't let go of Bear's hand. They got the Harley off his leg, and the pain that followed made his vision gray at the edges. Nothing broken, the paramedics said, but badly bruised. He'd be limping for weeks. Daisy's shoulder was sprained, her back bruised, where the bat had caught her. The paramedics wrapped her in a blanket that swallowed her whole, and she looked even smaller than before. "Where are your parents, honey?" one of them asked gently. Daisy looked at the ground. The silence stretched. Bear squeezed her hand. "She's with me," he said, and something about the way he said it made the paramedic decide not to push. At the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced the snow and the smell of antiseptic replaced gasoline. They were put in adjacent exam rooms, curtains pulled back so Daisy could see Bear and Bear could see her. X-rays were taken, forms were filled out. A social worker appeared, young and well-meaning, asking careful questions that Daisy answered with one-word responses or silence. Bear watched her through the gap in the curtains, watched the way she pulled the hospital blanket tighter every time someone in a uniform walked by. Watched the fear that had been beaten into her by a world that had given her every reason to believe that authority meant danger. When the social worker stepped out to make a call, Bear's phone was already in his hand. The number he dialed belonged to Marcus Hawk Thompson, president of the Montana chapter of the Hells Angels. They'd ridden together for 30 years. If Bear trusted anyone to understand what needed to happen next, it was Hawk. "Yeah." Hawk's voice came through rough with late night and too much whiskey. "It's Bear." The tone shifted immediately. "You good? I'm at County General. Got jumped at a gas station." "I'm fine," but he paused, looking at Daisy. "We got a situation with the kid." He heard Hawk sit up, heard the background noise go quiet. "Talk to me." Bear did. He painted the gas station in quick strokes. The spilled coffee, the bat, the little girl who'd thrown herself into the line of fire. Then he added the detail that changed everything. "She's Maggie Morgan's daughter." Silence on the other end. Every Hell's Angel who'd ridden in the 90s remembered Maggie. Some with fondness, some with regret, all with respect. "Maggie had a kid," Hawk said slowly. 7 years old. Mother's dead. No other family that's worth a damn. Been living on the streets for months." Bear's voice hardened. "She took a hit from that bat, Hawk. For me. Because Maggie told her to find someone with phoenix wings if she ever needed help." More silence. Then Hawk's voice came back, and it had the particular quality of a man who'd just made a decision. "Where are the 3 who did it? Ran before the cops showed up." "There's video, though. Trucker filmed the whole thing." "Good. Send me everything. Names, descriptions, whatever the cops have." "What are you thinking?" Hawk exhaled slowly. "I'm thinking about a kid named Tommy Mitchell. You remember him?" Bear's chest went tight. Tommy had been the 8-year-old son of Jackson Mitchell, one of their brothers, back in 2009. Domestic situation, ex-wife's new boyfriend getting violent. They'd known something was wrong, but they'd moved too slow. Trusted the system too much. Jackson had tried going through the proper channels, had filed reports, had done everything by the book. By the time they understood how bad it was, Tommy was dead. Suicide at 8 years old because the adults around him had failed to protect him, because the boyfriend had convinced the court system he was reformed, because nobody had believed in 8-year-old stories about what happened when the caseworkers left. Jackson had left the club after that, destroyed by guilt. His wife Sarah had stayed, had changed her road name to Raven, had joined the Hells Angels instead of leaving with her husband because she needed to make sure it never happened again to another child. "I remember," Bear said quietly. "We failed that kid," Hawk said. "We moved too slow. We didn't push hard enough, and a little boy died because we thought someone else would handle it." His voice went hard. "I'm not failing another one." especially not one who threw herself in front of a bat for one of ours, especially not Maggie's daughter. What's the play you keep that kid where you can see her? Don't let social services warehouse her somewhere. We're rolling. Rolling every chapter within 500 miles. If we're going to make a statement about who we protect and why we're going to make it loud enough that nobody misses it. He paused, and Bear, this isn't just about justice for what happened tonight. We need to know if those three men have done this before. I got a bad feeling about this. Bear looked at Daisy through the curtain. She'd fallen into an exhausted doze. The bear clutched against her chest, one small arm hanging over the edge of the bed. He thought about the way she'd flinched when they'd first approached her, the healing bruises on her face, the fact that she'd been on the streets for 3 months and somehow survived. I'll call Raven, he said. She'll know what to ask. Already texted her. She's on her way to the hospital now. The call ended. Bear put his phone away and settled back against the pillows, ignoring the ache in his leg. Across the gap in the curtains, Daisy's eyes opened. She looked at him, and something in her expression was different. Less afraid, more hopeful. Are they going to take me away? She asked, her voice small. Bear considered lying, decided she'd had enough of lies. They're going to try to find you a safe place, he said. That's their job. What if I don't want to go? Then we'll figure something out. She studied him, this big weathered man with the white beard and the gentle eyes. You really knew my mama, I really did. Was she brave? Bear smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd managed in a long time. Your mama was the bravest person I ever met. She rode a motorcycle bigger than she was, and she never backed down from anything that mattered. She told me stories, Daisy said, about the family with the phoenix wings. She said they took care of their own. We do, Bear said, and then because it needed to be said out loud, and you're one of ours now, little one, whether those wings are on your back yet or not. Daisy's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the terrified tears from the parking lot. These were different. These were the tears of someone who'd been wandering in the cold for so long, they'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Promise, she whispered. Bear held out his hand, pinky finger extended in the universal gesture of childhood oaths. Daisy reached across the gap between their beds and hooked her tiny finger around his much larger one. I promise, he said, you're not alone anymore. Outside, the snow kept falling, but somewhere across Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Washington, phones were ringing. Messages were being sent. Engines were starting to rumble to life. The word was going out through the network of chapters and clubs, spreading like wildfire through a community that outsiders feared and insiders understood was built on something deeper than leather and chrome. A little girl had saved one of their own, and now it was their turn to save her. The night nurse came by to check vitals, saw the two of them with fingers still locked, and made a note on her chart that maybe didn't belong there but felt important in anyway. Patient appears to have family present. Recommend keeping them together. Sometimes the system worked not because of its rules, but in spite of them. Sometimes a nurse saw what needed to happen and found a way to make the paperwork say yes instead of no. Sarah Raven Mitchell arrived at the hospital just after midnight, still wearing her leather vest over a flannel shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that was coming loose. At 43, she'd seen enough trauma in her years as an ER nurse, and then as a Hells Angels member, to know that the real damage wasn't always visible on x-rays. She found Bear's room, first knocked softly on the doorframe. He looked up from where he was still holding Daisy's pinky finger across the gap between beds, and something in his expression made Raven's chest tighten. She's Maggie's, he said quietly. Raven's eyes went to the little girl, took in the too thin frame, the healing bruises, the way even in sleep she held herself ready to run. I know, Hawk called me. She walked to Daisy's bedside, studied her face. The resemblance was there if you knew to look for it. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw. Maggie's daughter grown from a possibility into a person. What do we know, Raven asked. Mother died 6 months ago. Cancer. Stepfather's a drunk and worse. She's been on the streets for 3 months. Bear's voice got quieter. She recognized my vest because Maggie told her to look for the phoenix wings if she ever needed help. Raven closed her eyes briefly, so Maggie knew. She knew she was dying, and she made sure her daughter knew where to find family. Looks like it. And the 3 men who attacked you got away before the cops arrived. But there's video. They'll be found. Raven nodded slowly, her mind already working through the implications. If those men targeted a homeless 7-year-old at a gas station, this wasn't their first time. And if it wasn't their first time, there might be other victims. I'll make some calls, she said. I know people in social services. Quietly off the record, we need to know if there have been other reports about men matching their descriptions and children going missing. Bear's expression darkened. You think they're part of something bigger. I think a man who'll swing a bat at a child doesn't usually stop at one child. She looked at Daisy again. And I think we need to know what we're really dealing with before those men disappear into the system. The social worker returned, then clipboard in hand, looking exhausted and overwhelmed. It was Christmas Eve turning into Christmas morning, and the system was operating on skeleton staff. We're going to need to find temporary placement for the minor, she said, her tone apologetic. I've made some calls, but everything's full because of the holiday. She might need to stay here overnight until we can sort something out. She's staying with me, Raven said, her voice leaving no room for argument. I'm a registered foster parent. I've got space, I've got clearance, and I'm not leaving this child to sleep in a hospital waiting room on Christmas. The social worker looked like she wanted to argue, then looked at the clock at her clipboard, at the little girl who'd saved an old man from getting his skull cracked open. Let me make a call, she said. 20 minutes later, the paperwork was signed. Temporary emergency foster placement with Sarah Mitchell, pending full review after the holiday. The social worker made Raven promise to bring Daisy in for a proper interview and evaluation the day after Christmas. Raven promised and meant it. Whatever came next, they'd face it the right way. But tonight, this child wasn't going to be alone. Bear was discharged an hour later, his leg wrapped tight. A cane provided strict instructions to stay off it as much as possible. He ignored most of the instructions, limping over to Daisy's bed, where she was finally awake, eyes wide and uncertain. You're going to come home with us for a while, he told her gently. This is Raven. She's family too, and she makes the best pancakes you've ever tasted. Daisy looked at Raven with the careful assessment of a child who'd learned to read adults fast. She saw the tattoos, the leather, the same phoenix and iron cross on the vest, but she also saw the way Raven's eyes softened when she looked at her, the careful way she'd adjusted Bear's cane to the right height, the small details that spoke of someone who paid attention. Hi, Daisy said quietly. Hi yourself, Raven replied. You ready to get out of here? The drive to Raven's house took 20 minutes through a town that was just starting to wake up to Christmas morning. Lights twinkled on houses, and you could see through windows into living rooms where families were gathering around trees. Daisy sat in the back seat of Raven's truck, Bear in the passenger seat with his leg propped up, and watched the world go by. She didn't ask where they were going or how long she could stay. She'd learned not to ask questions like that. Answers usually hurt more than uncertainty. Raven's house sat on the edge of town, a low rambling structure that had clearly been added to over the years without much concern for architectural coherence. There were motorcycles parked under a carport, a garage with its door half open revealing more bikes in various states of assembly, and Christmas lights strung along the porch railing in a pattern that had definitely given up on being straight. Inside, warmth hit like a physical thing. The smell of coffee and pine needles and old leather, the sound of a radio playing classic rock at low volume, the sight of a shaggy dog that immediately launched itself at them with more enthusiasm than coordination. That's Tank, Raven said as the dog tried to climb into Daisy's arms. He's harmless, mostly just wants attention and possibly your breakfast if you're not careful. Daisy laughed, a small surprise sound as the dog licked her face. It might have been the first time Bear had heard her laugh. The sound was bright and genuine, and it made something in his chest settle into place. Raven showed Daisy to a bathroom where she could wash up, provided her with clean clothes that were still too big, but at least fit better than the hospital gown. While Daisy cleaned up, Raven pulled Bear aside in the kitchen. Hawks called an assembly, she said quietly. 500 bikes, maybe more. They'll be here by tomorrow afternoon. Bear nodded. He'd expected as much. When the word went out that one of their own had been attacked and a child had intervened, the response would be massive. What's the plan? We find those 3 men. We make sure they understand that what they did has consequences. And we make sure the whole county knows that kids like Daisy aren't invisible anymore. Raven's expression hardened. But first, I need to make those calls. If my instinct is right and these men are part of something bigger, we need to know before they lawyer up and disappear. She spent the next hour on the phone while Bear sat with Daisy at the kitchen table, watching her eat pancakes with the focused intensity of someone who wasn't sure when the next meal was coming. He didn't comment on how she ate, just kept sliding more food onto her plate until she finally slowed down. Better, he asked. Daisy nodded, her eyes already starting to droop. The warmth, the food, the lack of immediate danger, it was all catching up with her. There's a guest room down the hall, Raven said gently, hanging up her phone. It's got a bed and some blankets, and it's all yours if you want to rest for a while. Daisy looked at Bear, a question in her eyes. You'll be here. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. She let Raven lead her to the room. It was small but clean, with a bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a window that looked out over the yard. On the dresser sat a framed photo of a young boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. Daisy studied it for a moment. That's my son, Raven said quietly. Tommy. He's not with us anymore, but I like to think he'd want his room to help other kids who need a safe place. Daisy didn't ask what happened to Tommy. She was 7 years old, but she'd learned enough about loss to recognize it in someone else's voice. Thank you, she said simply. Raven's throat tightened. She helped Daisy climb onto the bed, pulled the blankets up. Tank jumped up after her, settling himself at her feet like a guardian made of fur and bad breath. Within 5 minutes, Daisy was asleep. Raven came back to the kitchen and poured herself more coffee. Bear sat across from her, one hand absently rubbing his leg. What did you find out, he asked. Her expression was grim. 3 reports in the last 6 months. Homeless children who've gone missing from this area. All of them between 7 and 10 years old. And all of them last seen near gas stations or truck stops. Bear's jaw tightened. And let me guess, the descriptions of the men involved matched Dylan, Travis, and Kyle. 2 of the reports mentioned a pickup truck and men matching their descriptions. The third was less specific, but the location and timing fit. She set down her coffee cup. Bear, I think we're looking at something bigger than just assault. I think those men are part of a trafficking operation. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and ugly. Does Hawk know I called him right before I woke you? He's already reached out to his contact at the FBI. If there's an active investigation into trafficking in this region, we need to coordinate, not interfere. And if there isn't, then we give them everything we've got and make damn sure they start one. Raven's eyes were hard. Those 3 men didn't just attack you and hurt Daisy. They're predators, and Daisy got away from them. Other kids might not have been so lucky. Bear thought about Daisy sleeping in the next room, about how close she'd come to being just another missing child on a social worker's impossible caseload. About how if she hadn't recognized his vest, if she hadn't remembered her mother's words about phoenix wings, she might have stayed hidden behind that vending machine, and those men might have found her later. We find them, he said. We make sure they never hurt another kid. We will, Raven promised. But we do it smart. We do it right. For Tommy, for Maggie, for every child who didn't get saved. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the soft sound of Daisy's breathing from the other room and Tank's gentle snoring. Your Emma called, Raven said eventually. She saw the video. It's already gone viral. Bear pulled out his phone and opened his messages. Sure enough, there were 3 missed calls from Emma and a text that said simply, Dad, please call me. I saw what happened. Are you okay? His thumb hovered over her number. 10 years of silence and now this. You should call her back, Raven said gently. Bear looked toward the room where Daisy slept. I don't know what to say to her. How about the truth that you're okay? That you met Maggie's daughter? That you're trying to do right by a little girl who saved your life? And if she tries to talk me out of keeping Daisy, Raven's smile was slight but warm. Then you remind her that you're 68 years old and you stopped taking orders from your children about the same time they started trying to give them. Bear snorted, then winced as the movement pulled at his bruised ribs. He hit the call button before he could overthink it. Emma answered on the second ring. Dad. Hi, baby girl. There was a pause and he could hear her breath catch. She hadn't expected him to use the old nickname. I saw the video, she said. Are you hurt? Banged up, nothing broken. I'll live. And the little girl, Bear, looked toward the guest room. She's got a sprained shoulder and some bruises. But she's safe now. She's sleeping in the next room. Another pause. Dad, the news is saying she's homeless, that she's been on the streets for months. Her mama died 6 months ago. Cancer. Stepfather was no good. She's been running ever since. And you just decided to take her in. Bear's voice got an edge. What would you have me do, Emma? Leave her to the system. She saved my life. She threw herself in front of a bat because her mother told her to look for someone with phoenix wings if she ever needed help. He heard Emma's sharp intake of breath. The mother. Do you know who she was, Maggie Morgan? You were too young to remember her well, but she rode with us back in the day. Before you were born, before I met your mother even. She was family. And this little girl is her daughter. This little girl is Daisy. And right now she's asleep in Raven's house because it's Christmas morning and she has nowhere else to go. Bear's voice softened. Emma, I know you and I haven't talked in 10 years. I know you made your choice and I made mine. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about the club. This is about a child who needs help and a promise I made to someone who's gone. I'm not trying to talk you out of anything, Emma said, and her voice had changed, gotten quieter. I'm trying to tell you that I'm coming to see you. Bear's heart did something complicated. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to. I've been watching you almost die on some stranger's phone for the last 6 hours, and I keep thinking about how the last thing I said to you was that you had to choose. She took a breath. And I'm realizing that maybe I was wrong. Maybe you couldn't choose because being the kind of person who wears that vest and being the kind of person that little girl needed are the same thing. When can you be here? I'm already packing. I can be there by tomorrow afternoon. Emma, he started. Don't. Just don't. She was crying now. He could hear it in her voice. I've wasted 10 years being angry at you for choosing the club over me. And then I saw that video and I realized you didn't choose the club over me. You chose to be the kind of man who doesn't walk away when someone needs help. And that's who you've always been. I was just too stubborn to see it. After they hung up, Bear sat at the kitchen table for a long time, phone in his hand, trying to process the idea that his daughter was coming. That maybe, just maybe, 10 years of silence was about to end. The video had been uploaded at 3 in the morning by the trucker, whose hands had shaken so badly he had almost dropped his phone. By dawn, it had been shared 10,000 times. By the time the sun was fully up on Christmas morning, it had crossed 1 million views and was climbing fast. The footage was grainy, shot from a distance, but the story it told was crystalline clear. An old man on the ground, a motorcycle pinning his leg. 3 men circling one with a bat, and then from nowhere a small figure in a summer dress launching herself into the frame, arms spread wide, covering the biker's body with her own. The audio was worse than the video, crackling and distorted by wind and distance. But you could hear her voice. Small and desperate and absolutely certain. Please don't hurt him. Please take my bear. It's all I have. The comments section exploded. Some people saw a beautiful act of selfless courage. Others saw a broken system that had failed a child so completely she had to save herself. A few saw the Hells Angels patch on Bear's vest and decided he probably deserved it. But those comments got buried under an avalanche of outrage from people who understood that whatever you thought about bikers, a 7-year-old with nothing shouldn't have to throw herself in front of a weapon. By noon, the video had been picked up by local news. By evening, it was national. And the headlines all said variations of the same thing: homeless girl saves biker's life on Christmas Eve. The phone at Raven's house started ringing. News organizations wanting interviews. Talk shows wanting them to appear. People offering donations, offering to adopt Daisy, offering their opinions on what should happen next. Raven unplugged the phone after the 15th call. We're not doing this, she told Bear. We're not turning that child into a spectacle, agreed Bear said. But we can use the attention. If those 3 men think they can disappear into the woodwork, they're about to learn different. Hawk arrived at Raven's house just after noon, his truck pulling up alongside a growing line of motorcycles. Behind him came more bikes and more and more. By 1 in the afternoon, Raven Street looked like a Hells Angels convention. Inside, Daisy had woken from her nap and was sitting at the kitchen table with Tank's head in her lap, watching through the window as more and more bikers arrived. Her eyes were huge. Why are they all here? She asked. Bear limped over to sit beside her. Remember how I told you that when one of us gets hurt, we all feel it? She nodded. Well, when somebody saves one of us, we all feel that too. Every person out there came because of what you did. Daisy looked at him, trying to understand. I just didn't want you to get hurt. I know, Bear said. And that's exactly why they're here. Because you're 7 years old and you've got nothing and you still chose to help. That matters to people like us. Hawk came in then stomping snow off his boots, his presence filling the small kitchen. He was a big man, 55 years old, with dark hair shot through with silver and a beard trimmed close. His vest bore the president's patch, and his arms were covered in tattoos that told the story of 40 years on the road. He walked up to Daisy and without fanfare dropped to one knee so he was at her eye level. "You must be Daisy," he said, his voice gentle in a way that didn't match his appearance. "I'm Hawk. Bear's my brother, which means you and I are already family." Daisy studied him with her careful assessment. "Everyone here came because of me. Everyone here came because of what you did." Hawk corrected. "You saved one of ours. That means something to us. It means everything." He stood up and addressed the room where other members had started filtering in. Raven had put out coffee and someone had brought donuts, and the small kitchen was rapidly filling with leather and ink and quiet conversation. "Most of you have seen the video by now," Hawk said. "You know what happened at that gas station? 3 men attacked Bear, and this little girl put herself between them and him. She took a hit from a bat because she thought he was worth protecting." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Now those 3 men think they can go home and sleep easy," Hawk continued. "They think what they did doesn't matter. They think a coffee stain justifies assault. They think a homeless kid is nobody worth worrying about." His voice hardened. "But here's what they don't know. We've been making calls. Those 3 men, they're not just bullies, they're predators. 3 children have gone missing from this area in the last 6 months. All of them homeless. All of them last seen near locations these men frequent." The temperature in the room dropped. Every biker there understood what he was saying. "We've contacted the FBI," Hawk said. "They've confirmed there's been an ongoing investigation into trafficking activity in this region. What happened to Bear and Daisy? That wasn't random violence. That was 3 men who are part of a larger operation targeting vulnerable children." Bear felt Daisy press closer to his side. He put his arm around her shoulders, protective. "So here's what we're going to do," Hawk said. "We're going to find those 3 men. We're going to make sure they understand that the whole county is watching. And we're going to work with law enforcement to make sure they answer for every child they've hurt." He looked down at Daisy. "And we're going to make sure this little girl knows that she's not invisible anymore. That she's got 500 people willing to stand between her and anyone who wants to hurt her." The room erupted in agreement, fists raised, voices rising. Daisy pressed closer to Bear, overwhelmed by the noise and the intensity. Hawk raised a hand and the room quieted. "But we do this right," he said. "We're not vigilantes. We're not a mob. Sheriff's already got warrants out. FBI's building their case. We're just going to make sure everyone involved understands that this little girl has a family now, and that family doesn't forget." Over the next few hours, the plan took shape. They'd stage at the clubhouse, then roll out in formation to the bar, where Dylan, Travis, and Kyle were known to spend their afternoons. The sheriff had been notified and was coordinating. This wasn't about revenge. It was about sending a message that would echo across the state. You don't hurt kids. Not in this county. Not while the Hells Angels were watching. Bear pulled Hawk aside while the others were organizing. "Emma's coming," he said. "She'll be here tomorrow." Hawk's eyebrows rose. "You're Emma." "The one who cut you off. She saw the video. She wants to see Daisy." Bear ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what she's going to think about all this. She's going to think her father is the kind of man who doesn't leave kids to freeze in parking lots," Hawk said firmly. "And if she doesn't see that, then she's not looking hard enough. What if she tries to take Daisy? Then she'll have to get through both you and Raven. And me. And about 500 other people." Hawk's expression softened slightly. "But Bear, brother, I don't think that's what this is. I think your daughter's been looking for an excuse to come back for 10 years. And you just gave her one." The convoy rolled out at 3 in the afternoon on Christmas Day. 500 motorcycles moving in tight formation, engines rumbling in harmony chrome, catching the pale winter light. They rode 2 by 2, stretching back nearly a mile along the highway. At the front, Hawk and the senior members. In the middle, protected on all sides, Raven's truck, with Daisy sitting in the back seat, her small face pressed to the window in awe. Bear rode, despite his leg, his Harley steady beneath him, his vest patch catching the light. People stopped on the sidewalks to watch. Cars pulled over. Some took pictures. Others just stood and stared at the river of leather and steel flowing past. This was history happening, and everyone knew it. The bar sat on the edge of town, the kind of place where the regulars showed up regardless of the holiday. Dylan, Travis, and Kyle were inside nursing hangovers and trying to convince themselves that the video circulating online wasn't that big a deal. They'd almost succeeded when they heard the rumble. At first, it was distant enough to ignore. Thunder, maybe. A plow truck clearing the highways. But then it got louder, closer. Until the glasses on the bar started to rattle and conversations died mid-sentence. Someone near the door pushed aside the curtain and went very still. You boys might want to see this," he said, his voice hollow. Dylan, Travis, and Kyle shuffled to the window, the alcohol haze starting to burn off as they took in what was outside. The parking lot was filled edge to edge with motorcycles. Hell's Angels stood in a wide formation around the bar's entrance, black leather vests forming a wall of quiet intent. No one shouted, no one beat on doors. They simply waited. At the center of the formation, Hawk stood with Bear at his side. Raven was just behind them, and next to her, wearing a small leather vest that someone had cut down to child size, was Daisy. The bar's door opened slowly. Dylan stepped out first, squinting against the brightness of all those headlights and chrome catching the afternoon sun. His bravado evaporated as his brain caught up with what his eyes were seeing. He recognized the old biker immediately, the white beard now framed not by snow, but by a forest of leather and steel. His gaze flitted nervously from the skull tattoos on arms folded over vests to the calm, unreadable expressions staring back at him. Travis and Kyle shuffled out behind him, shoulders drawn up, bodies trying to make themselves smaller. Kyle still had last night's coffee stain on his boot, a brown smear that suddenly seemed louder than all the engines idling at the edges of the lot. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing in a calm, deliberate pattern. Sheriff Tom Bradford stepped out, hand resting casually near his holster, not gripping it, just aware of it. He gave Hawk a nod, the kind exchange between two forces that knew today at least which side of the line they were standing on together. Behind the sheriff's car, an unmarked sedan arrived. Two people in dark suits emerged, FBI badges visible on their belts. The woman, Agent Victoria Richardson, had sharp eyes that took in the scene with professional assessment. Hawk took a few steps forward, boots crunching on the packed snow. When he spoke, his voice carried without effort. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. The sarcasm was mild, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Sleep well." The three men shifted, eyes darting toward the road, calculating escape routes and finding none. There were motorcycles everywhere, blocking every exit. "We got a problem." Hawk continued, pacing slowly in front of them. "See, last night you boys decided to have yourselves a little fun. Old man in the snow, big bike on his leg, bat in your hand." He held out his palm. Bear placed a phone in it without looking. Hawk tapped the screen and the gas station scene lit up on his phone, volume turned up so everyone could hear. The trucker's shaky footage played. The shove, the fall, the bat rising. Then Daisy, a streak of bravery in a summer dress, her tiny body covering Bear. Her voice cracking on the words, "Just don't hurt him." The recording played on a portable speaker. One of the bikers had brought her plea, floating over the assembled crowd like a prayer someone had forgotten to answer. Then the sickening sound of the bat connecting with her small body, her cry of pain. Dylan's face went pale. Travis couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Kyle just stared at the ground. "Now we're not here to talk about spilled coffee," Hawk said when the video ended. "We're here to talk about lines. There are a lot of lines in this world. Some are painted on roads. Some are written in law books." He jerked his chin toward the sheriff. "And some are the ones decent human beings don't cross whether anyone's watching or not." He took another step closer, close enough now that Dylan could see the details in the skull tattoo on his bicep, the way the ink had faded just slightly with time, the deliberate artistry in every line. "You crossed every one of those lines when you lifted that bat over a child," Hawk said. His voice didn't rise, but the silence around them seemed to deepen in response. Dylan tried on his old swagger like a jacket that no longer fit. "We didn't mean to," he began, but his voice cracked on the second word. Hawk cut him off with a small shake of his head. "You meant enough to swing. You meant enough not to stop when she screamed. You meant enough to drive away and leave a little girl sobbing in the snow because you couldn't handle a coffee stain on your boot." He angled his head toward the stain again. "That right there, that's the cheapest thing that's ever cost you this much." Agent Richardson stepped forward now, her voice professional and cold. "Dylan Garrett, Travis McCain, Kyle Brennan, You're under arrest for assault, child endangerment, and leaving the scene of an injury. She paused. And those are just the charges we can prove from last night. Her partner moved forward with handcuffs, but Hawk held up a hand. Before we get to the paperwork, he said there's one more piece of business. He turned his head, slightly looking toward Raven's truck. Daisy, he called, voice instantly softer. Sweetheart, you mind stepping out for a minute? Raven's door opened first. She helped Daisy out of the back seat. The little girl's new leather vest was visible over her borrowed coat, the Angel's family patch bright against the dark leather. Every biker had chipped in to have it made overnight, a rush job that had cost extra, but nobody had complained. The entire formation subtly shifted, making room without breaking ranks, creating a clear path between Daisy and the three men who'd swung the bat. Bear stepped up beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder. Not pushing, not pulling, just there if she needed it. Daisy's legs felt shaky, but she walked anyway, each step leaving small prints in the snow. When she reached Hawk's side, he crouched slightly so he wouldn't tower over her. Daisy, Hawk said gently, these are the men from last night. The three couldn't quite meet her eyes. Their faces were pale, although bravado drained out, leaving something raw and uncomfortable behind. They're about to go with the sheriff, Hawk continued, to answer for what they did. But before they do, he looked back at them, gaze hardening. You got something you need to say to this child. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the idle of distant engines and the wind pushing across the empty lot. Then Sheriff Bradford spoke, his voice quiet but carrying authority. Knees. The word dropped into the cold like a stone into water. Not a demand for humiliation, but a reminder of perspective, a restoration of the moral order that had been broken. The three men sank slowly, jeans darkening where they met the snow. On their knees, they were suddenly at Daisy's eye level. It was harder to pretend she was just a problem or a blur or a thing they could shove aside. She was right there, tiny and real, her teddy bear tucked under one arm, the Angel's family patch gleaming on her back when the coat shifted. Dylan cleared his throat. His hands were shaking slightly. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out thick, reluctant. I was drunk. I was stupid. I shouldn't have hurt you. He tried to meet her eyes and couldn't quite manage it. Daisy studied his face with a seriousness that didn't fit her age. She'd heard apologies before. Robert had apologized every time, usually right before he did it again. She knew an empty apology when she heard one. But she also knew something else now. Whatever these men said or didn't say, they didn't get to write her story anymore. She hugged her bear closer. You scared me, she said simply. Her voice was small, but it carried a quiet verdict. But you don't get to do that again. Hawk nodded slowly as if she'd just spoken for all of them. He straightened his shadow, falling long across the snow. Here's how this goes, he said, addressing the three men. You're leaving here in the back of that cruiser. You're going to face charges for what you did to this child and to Bear. You're going to face every person in this town who sees that video and realizes what kind of men you really are. He took a step back, making a subtle gesture with his hand. The bikers shifted, opening a corridor leading directly to the sheriff's car. You're also done here, Hawk added, voice flat. This bar, this town, this highway. You show up around our kid again, or anyone like her, and you won't just be answering to the law. There was no threat in his tone, not the kind you could put in a police report. But there was a promise, a very clear one. And every biker in that lot stood as living proof that it wasn't an empty one. Agent Richardson stepped forward. Actually, Hawk said we're going to need to take them into federal custody. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. On what grounds? Richardson pulled out a folder, handed it to him. We've been tracking a trafficking operation in this region for 18 months. Missing children movement across state lines, organized network. She looked at Dylan, Travis, and Kyle with professional disgust. These three just made our job a lot easier. The word trafficking rippled through the assembled bikers like electricity. Bear's hand tightened on Daisy's shoulder, protective. How many kids? Hawk asked, his voice deadly quiet. We're not sure yet, Richardson said, but we have evidence linking them to at least 3 disappearances in the last 6 months. All homeless children, all between 7 and 10 years old. She looked at Daisy, her expression softening slightly. You got lucky, sweetheart. You got away. Not everyone did. Daisy's face went pale. She pressed closer to Bear, understanding in that moment just how close she'd come to being another missing child on a poster nobody paid attention to. The FBI agents moved forward with federal handcuffs. Dylan started to resist to protest, but one look at 500 bikers watching him in absolute silence made him reconsider. They cuffed all three men and guided them toward the unmarked sedan. As they were being loaded into the car, Richardson turned back to Hawk. "We're going to need statements from both of you," she said, nodding at Bear and Daisy. "And we'd appreciate it if your organization could share any information you have gathered. You'll have everything we've got," Hawk promised. "And if you need witnesses or support during the investigation, you just ask." Richardson studied him for a moment. "I'll be honest," she said. "When I heard Hell's Angels were involved, I expected this to be more complicated." Hawk's smile was slight. "We get that a lot. But see, Agent Richardson, we're not complicated. We're pretty simple, actually. Someone hurts a kid, we show up. Someone tries to disappear a child into the dark, we shine a light. That's all this is." She nodded slowly, something like respect crossing her face. "Then keep shining that light, because right now we need to find the rest of this network. And we need to find the other children before it's too late." The sedan pulled away, taking Dylan, Travis, and Kyle toward a reckoning that would involve federal prosecutors, trafficking charges, and sentences measured in decades instead of months. Daisy watched them go, Bear's hand steady on her shoulder. For the first time since her mother died, since Robert's fist had driven her into the winter streets, since she'd learned that the world was mostly cold and hard and mean, she felt something shift. She felt safe. The assembly didn't break up immediately. Bikers mingled, sharing coffee from thermoses, talking in low voices about next steps. Several approached Daisy, each one crouching to her level, introducing themselves, telling her that if she ever needed anything, she had family now. One older woman with gray streaks in her long hair and a sleeve of rose tattoos handed Daisy a small stuffed phoenix. "For your collection," she said with a wink, "since you're part of the flock now." Daisy clutched it along with her, Bear, overwhelmed, but also something else. Something that felt suspiciously like belonging. Raven approached Hawk and Bear as the crowd started to thin. "We did good today," she said, "but this is just the start." "What do you mean?" Bear asked. "I mean, there are 12 other children out there," Raven said. 12 that the FBI knows about, and probably more that haven't been reported because they're homeless. They're runaways, they're the ones nobody's looking for." She looked at Daisy. "We found one. We need to find the rest." Hawk nodded slowly. "You're thinking we make this bigger." "I'm thinking we make this permanent," Raven corrected. "We've been talking about community outreach for years. What if we actually did it? What if we created something specifically to find and protect kids like Daisy?" A program, Bear said. "Understanding dawning an organization." Raven countered. "Something with structure and funding and reach. Something that uses our network but also works with social services and law enforcement. Something that makes sure no child has to choose between freezing to death and getting trafficked." "Maggie's mission," Hawk said quietly. Both of them looked at him. "That's what we call it," he explained. "Maggie told her daughter to look for the phoenix wings when she needed help. So we make sure every kid knows they can do the same. We make Maggie's promise to Daisy into a promise to every child in this state, then every state." Raven's eyes were shining. Yeah, that's exactly right." They stood there in the parking lot, three bikers with more miles behind them than ahead, planning something that would outlive all of them. Something that would turn one little girl's courage on a Christmas Eve into a legacy that would save hundreds of children. But that would come later. Right now, there was still Christmas to finish. Emma Harrison pulled into Billings just as the sun was setting on Christmas Day. She'd driven straight through from Seattle, 7 hours of white-knuckle winter driving, and anxiety that sat like a stone in her stomach. She'd practiced what she was going to say 100 times. But when she pulled up to Raven's house and saw her father standing on the porch leaning on a cane, all of those practiced words disappeared. He looked older. His beard was whiter than she remembered, his movements more careful. But his eyes were the same, still kind, still tired, still carrying the weight of too many goodbyes. Emma got out of the car slowly. They looked at each other across the yard, 10 years of silence stretching between them like a canyon. "Hi, Dad," she finally said. "Hi, baby girl." Emma's eyes moved past him to the window where she could see a small figure watching from inside. Dark hair, big eyes, wearing an oversized sweater. "Is that her?" Emma asked. "That's Daisy." Emma walked up the porch steps, each one feeling harder than it should. When she reached the top, she and Bear just stood there, neither quite sure how to bridge the gap. I'm sorry, Emma said suddenly, for 10 years, for making you choose, for not understanding. Bear shook his head. I'm the one who should apologize. I chose the vest over you, and that wasn't fair. No, Emma said firmly. You chose to be who you are. And I punished you for it because I was scared and stupid, and I thought loving you meant changing you. She took a breath, and suddenly she was crying. And then I saw that video, and I saw you on the ground, and I saw that little girl throw herself in front of a bat for you, and I realized that you've been that person my whole life. You've been the one who shows up when people need help. And I made you feel like that was something to be ashamed of. Bear pulled her into a hug, Kane clattering to the porch as he wrapped his arms around his daughter for the first time in a decade. Emma buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed, 10 years of grief and regret pouring out in the cold winter air. I missed you, she whispered. I missed you too, baby girl, every single day. They stood like that for a long time, father and daughter, finding their way back to each other in the space between heartbeats. Eventually, Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes. Can I meet her? Bear smiled. Yeah, come on. Inside the house was warm and smelled like coffee and something baking. Daisy was sitting at the kitchen table with Tank's head in her lap, watching the door with cautious eyes. Raven was at the stove, pulling cookies out of the oven. She looked up when they entered, gave Emma a small nod of greeting. Daisy Bear said gently, This is my daughter Emma. She drove all the way from Seattle to meet you. Emma moved slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal that might spook. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from Daisy. Hi, she said. I saw what you did for my dad. That was really brave. Daisy studied her with that careful assessment. You look like Bear, she said. Emma's mouth twitched. I get that a lot. An awkward silence stretched. Then Daisy said, Your dad's really nice. He kept his promise to my mama even though she'd been gone for a long time. Emma's throat tightened. Your mama sounds like she was a smart woman. She told me to find the phoenix wings if I needed help. Daisy touched the patch on her vest. She was right. Emma looked at the vest, at the tiny phoenix embroidered on the back, at how it matched the one on her father's. She thought about all the years she'd been angry about that patch, about what it represented. And she realized she'd been angry at the wrong thing. The patch wasn't the problem. The patch was just a symbol of the kind of man her father was. The kind of man who kept promises to people who were gone. The kind of man a desperate 7-year-old thought was worth saving. Can I ask you something? Emma said to Daisy. Okay. Do you feel safe here with my dad and Raven? Daisy thought about it seriously. Yeah, she said. Nobody hits me here, and if I get scared, Tank sleeps on my bed. And Bear promised I'm not alone anymore. Emma's eyes stung. Good, she said. That's really good. Over the next few hours, Emma watched how her father and Raven moved around Daisy. The gentle way they asked before touching her, the care they took to explain what was happening next, the absolute patience when she got scared or overwhelmed. This wasn't some impulsive decision to play hero. This was commitment. This was family. Later that evening, after Daisy had gone to bed with Tank curled at her feet, Emma sat with Bear and Raven in the living room. A small Christmas tree twinkled in the corner presents underneath it that the local Hells Angels had dropped off throughout the day. Social Services is going to want to do a full evaluation, Raven said. They'll interview Daisy, assess the home run background checks. And if they decide she can't stay here, Emma asked. Raven's expression hardened. Then we fight. We get lawyers. We do whatever it takes. What if I helped? Emma said. Both of them looked at her. I have a house in Seattle, Emma continued. Good schools. My husband has a stable job. I could provide character references, offer to be part of the support system. Show that Daisy has family beyond just you two. She looked at her father. If they're worried about a 68-year-old single man raising a traumatized child, having his daughter involved, might ease some of those concerns. Bear's voice was rough. You'd do that, Emma reached over and took his hand. Dad, I've spent 10 years running away from this family. I'm done running. If you're willing to have me back, I want to be part of whatever this is. Raven smiled, and it was the first genuinely warm expression Emma had seen from her. Welcome back, she said. They talked late into the night, planning strategy for the social services evaluation, discussing what Daisy would need in terms of therapy and school and stability. They talked about Emma's family in Seattle, about maybe bringing Daisy out for visits once she was more settled. And they talked about Maggie's mission, the organization that was already taking shape in Hawk's mind and Raven's planning. I want to help with that too, Emma said. I work in nonprofit management. I could help with structure fundraising, board development. You'd do that from Seattle, Bear asked? Or I'd do it from here, Emma said. My husband's been looking for a reason to get out of the city. And my kids? She smiled. Your grandkids, they should know their grandfather. The real one, not the scary biker I told them he was. Bear's eyes were shining. I'd like that, baby girl. I'd like that a lot. The days after Christmas blurred together in a flurry of activity. The FBI raid happened on a Tuesday morning, simultaneous operations across Montana, Idaho, and Washington. By evening, they'd arrested 17 people involved in the trafficking network and rescued 12 children who'd been held in various locations. One of those children was a 9-year-old girl named Sophie. She'd been missing for 4 months. Her parents had been searching desperately, appearing on news programs, organizing search parties, never giving up hope. Sophie had been held in a basement in Spokane, waiting to be moved again, when the FBI kicked down the door. Raven was there when Sophie was brought to the safe house, having volunteered to help with trauma-informed care for the rescued children. Sophie was small for 9, with blonde hair that had been chopped short and eyes that had seen too much. She wouldn't talk, wouldn't make eye contact, just sat in a chair and stared at nothing. Raven had seen that look before, in her own mirror after Tommy died, in Daisy's eyes that first night. She sat down next to Sophie, not too close, just present. My name's Raven, she said quietly. I'm not going to hurt you. Nobody here is going to hurt you. That part's over. Sophie didn't respond. I've got a daughter, Raven continued, which was a lie in the technical sense, but true in every way that mattered. She's 7. She's been through some hard things too. But she's safe now, and you're going to be safe too. Still nothing. Raven waited. Patience was something the road had taught her. Sometimes the only thing you could do was be present and wait for the other person to be ready. After 20 minutes, Sophie spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. Are my parents alive? Raven's heart broke. Yes, honey, they're alive. They've been looking for you every single day. They never stopped looking. They're on their way here right now. Sophie started crying, then huge racking sobs that shook her whole body. Raven moved closer and very carefully put an arm around her, and the little girl turned and buried her face in Raven's vest. 2 days later, Sophie was reunited with her parents in a scene that had every FBI agent in the building wiping their eyes. Her father, State Senator Marcus Patterson, held his daughter like she might disappear again if he loosened his grip even slightly. When he finally composed himself enough to speak to the press, his statement was brief but powerful. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I understood them when I first heard that a motorcycle club was involved in finding my daughter. He stopped, his voice breaking. I had prejudices, assumptions, but these people put themselves on the line for children they'd never met. They showed up when it mattered, and I will spend the rest of my career making sure their example isn't forgotten. Within a week, Senator Patterson had drafted legislation, child protection laws with teeth, mandatory reporting requirements, funding for organizations that worked with homeless youth, additional resources for trafficking investigations. He called it Daisy's Law. The court hearing for Daisy's custody happened 3 weeks after Christmas. The courtroom was packed. Bear and Raven sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, a sharp woman named Martinez, who'd worked pro bono because she believed in what they were doing. Behind them, the gallery was filled with Hell's Angels members in their cleanest vests, faces solemn presence, itself a statement. Emma sat in the front row with her husband and children ready to testify if needed. On the other side of the courtroom, Robert Sullivan sat with a cheap lawyer and a rehearsed story about how he'd been trying to get clean, how he wanted his daughter back, how these bikers had stolen her away. He didn't expect Daisy to be called to testify. The judge, a woman named Patricia Green, who'd been on the bench for 20 years, asked Daisy general questions about her mother, about Robert, about what life had been like before she ran. Daisy answered in a clear voice, not dramatizing, just stating facts. Robert drank. Robert hit her when he was drunk. The night she left, he'd put her head through the drywall in the hallway and told her she was lucky it wasn't worse. Robert's face went red. His lawyer tried to object. Judge Green shut him down with a look that could have frozen steel. Do you want to go back to living with Mr. Sullivan? The judge asked. Daisy looked at Robert. This man who'd married her mother and then made their lives hell. Her voice didn't waver. No, ma'am. And where would you like to live? With Bear and Raven, Daisy said. They're my family now. Judge Green looked at the bikers in the gallery, at the patches on their vests, at the skull tattoos and full sleeves and all the visual markers that society had taught her to be wary of. Then she looked at Daisy, at the certainty in her eyes, at the way she sat straighter when she talked about Bear and Raven. At the way Bear's hand rested gently on her shoulder, protective without being possessive. She looked at the stack of letters in front of her. Character references from FBI agents, from the sheriff, from Sophie's father, the senator, from teachers at the school Daisy had started attending, from neighbors who'd watched Bear and Raven with this child and seen nothing but care and commitment. I'm going to take this under advisement, she said. 3 weeks later, the ruling came down. Full custody to Bear Harrison and Sarah Mitchell as joint guardians with Emma Harrison Patterson, having visitation rights and support responsibilities. Robert Sullivan was granted nothing but a restraining order and a referral for investigation into child abuse. The courtroom erupted in cheers from the Hells Angels section. Judge Green didn't even try to maintain order. She just smiled slightly and banged her gavel once before leaving the bench. Daisy ran to Bear and Raven, and they caught her together, this little girl who'd saved an old biker's life and in the process saved his soul. But the story wasn't over. It was in many ways just beginning. Maggie's Mission was officially incorporated as a nonprofit organization 6 months after that Christmas Eve. Raven served as executive director with Hawk as board president, and Emma handling fundraising and development from a new office they'd opened in Billings. The mission was simple: find homeless children, provide immediate support, connect them with resources, and make sure that every kid in America knew that if they saw someone with phoenix wings, they were looking at family who would help. Local Hells Angels, chapters across the country, signed on committing resources and volunteers. They worked with social services, with schools, with law enforcement. They set up outreach programs at gas stations and truck stops, the places where homeless kids tended to congregate. And they found children. Dozens of them in the first year, hundreds in the second. Some were like Daisy, running from abuse. Some were running from foster care that had failed them. Some were runaways from homes that had never felt like home. All of them were alone until Maggie's Mission found them. The media coverage was constant at first. Every news outlet wanted to tell the story of the Hells Angels, who'd gone from being society's outlaws to its protectors. Some of the coverage was genuine. Some of it was exploitative. Raven and Hawk learned to navigate both, using the attention to secure funding while protecting the privacy of the children they served. Daisy grew up at the center of it all. She split her time between Montana and Seattle, between Bear's weathered wisdom and Emma's structured stability. She learned to ride a motorcycle and also how to argue a case in mock trial. She saw therapists who helped her process the trauma, and also sat with Raven learning how to help other kids who'd been through similar things. By the time she was 16, she was speaking at fundraisers. By 18, she was testifying before state legislatures about child protection laws. By 21, she was addressing Congress. She never forgot where she came from: the gas station, the vending machine, the 3 men with the bat. But those memories didn't define her anymore. They were just the prologue to a much longer story. The years passed. Bear's hair went completely white. His limp got more pronounced. But he still rode, still showed up at Maggie's Mission events, still sat with frightened children and told them in his gentle rumble that they were safe now. Emma moved her family to Billings, permanently bought a house 10 minutes from Raven's. Her children grew up calling Bear Grandpa and Daisy Aunt Daisy, no modifiers or explanations needed. Just family. Raven watched Maggie's Mission expand across the country, chapter by chapter, child by child. Sometimes she'd pull out the old photo of Tommy, her son, who hadn't made it, and she'd tell him about the kids they'd saved because they'd failed him. "I'm sorry we didn't move fast enough for you, baby," she'd whisper. "But we're moving now. We're moving for all of them." Hawk stepped down as president of the Montana chapter at 70, but he stayed on the board of Maggie's Mission until the day he died. His funeral was attended by over 1,000 bikers and 300 children who'd been saved by the organization he'd helped build. Dylan, Travis, and Kyle were convicted on federal trafficking charges. They'd be old men before they saw freedom again, if they ever did. The trafficking network they'd been part of was dismantled completely, 17 arrests, leading to 40 more, leading to the rescue of over 100 children across 7 states. Senator Patterson's Daisy's Law passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law 18 months after his daughter was rescued. It became a model for child protection legislation across the country. And through it all, Daisy kept moving forward. She got into Stanford Law School and graduated top of her class. She clerked for a federal judge. She could have gone anywhere, done anything. She chose to come back to Montana. At 25, she stood in front of Congress wearing her Hells Angels vest over a professional suit and testified in support of expanded child protection legislation that would build on everything Daisy's law had started. In the front row sat Bear 93, now his movements slow, but his eyes still sharp. Emma sat beside him, her hand on his arm. Both of them wore small phoenix pins on their lapels. Daisy looked at them and smiled. Then she began to speak. "My name is Daisy Morgan Harrison," she said, "and I'm here to tell you about the night I learned what family really means." She told them about the gas station, about being 7 and homeless and so cold she couldn't feel her feet anymore, about watching an old man get attacked and making the choice to help even though she had nothing to offer but herself. She told them about 500 motorcycles showing up because one little girl had decided a stranger was worth saving. She told them about a legal system that almost failed her and the people who refused to let it. And she told them about the 12 children who'd been rescued because someone finally looked hard enough to see them, and the hundreds more who'd been found in the years since because Maggie's mission made sure no child had to be invisible. Daisy's law was a start, she said, but we can do better. We have to do better, because right now, somewhere in America, there's another 7-year-old hiding behind a vending machine, and she deserves the same chance I got, the chance to be warm, to be safe, to be seen. When she finished, the chamber erupted in applause. The legislation passed 3 months later with overwhelming support, providing federal funding for homeless youth services and requiring states to implement comprehensive child protection protocols. After the vote, Daisy met Bear and Emma outside on the Capitol steps. Bear moved slowly now, leaning heavily on a cane, but he'd insisted on being there. "You did good, little one," he said, his voice rough with age and emotion. Daisy hugged him carefully, mindful of his fragile bones. "I learned from the best." Emma joined the hug, and for a moment they stood there on the steps of the Capitol, 3 generations of family that had chosen each other, that had fought for each other, that had proven that sometimes the most important families are the ones you build. That evening, they had dinner at a restaurant near the hotel, just the 3 of them, quiet and comfortable. They didn't talk about the legislation or the media coverage or any of the big important things. They talked about small stuff. Emma's grandkids, who Bear doted on despite pretending not to. The new chapter of Maggie's mission opening in Portland. Whether the Harley and Bear's garage would make it through one more season, even though everyone knew he hadn't been able to ride in 3 years. Normal stuff, family stuff. Halfway through the meal, Bear pulled something out of his jacket pocket. An old photograph, edges soft with handling. It showed a younger Bear and a woman with dark hair, both wearing leather vests, both grinning at the camera. Maggie in the days before Daisy, before everything got complicated. "She'd be proud of you," Bear said, sliding the photo across to Daisy. "Your mama. She'd be so damn proud." Daisy picked up the photo, traced her mother's face with gentle fingers. "I hope so," she said softly. "I know so," Bear replied, "because she made you. And she made sure you knew how to find your way home, even when home was just a patch on a stranger's back." That night in her hotel room, Daisy stood by the window looking out at the Capitol building all lit up against the night sky. She thought about the 7-year-old girl she'd been shivering behind a vending machine, with nothing but a bear and hope. She thought about how one choice, one moment of courage had changed everything. She thought about Bear, who'd kept every promise. About Raven, who'd shown her what strength looked like. About Emma, who'd learned that family was bigger than blood. About Hawk, who'd turned personal failure into a mission that saved hundreds. About all the people who'd shown up when it mattered. And she thought about all the other children out there, the ones still hiding, still cold, still waiting for someone to see them. Her phone buzzed. A message from the director of Maggie's mission in Chicago found 3 kids tonight. Safe now. "Thank you for what you're doing." Daisy smiled and typed back, "Thank you for showing up." Because that's what it came down to, really. Not the laws or the headlines or the viral videos. Just showing up. Being present. Being the person that scared kids could trust. Being family. She looked at her reflection in the window at the woman she'd become. 25 years old, a law degree, a job offer from the Department of Justice waiting on her desk back in Montana. She could go anywhere, do anything, but she already knew what she'd choose. She'd go back to Montana. She'd join Maggie's mission full-time as their legal director. She'd keep fighting for kids who needed someone to fight for them, because she'd been one of those kids once, and someone had shown up for her. Her mother's voice seemed to echo in her memory, warm and sure. You did good, baby girl. You found your family, and now you're making sure other kids can find theirs too. The phoenix on her vest caught the light, and Daisy touched it gently. It was the same vest she'd worn that Christmas Day 17 years ago, when 500 bikers had shown up to prove that she mattered. She'd had it altered as she grew, but she'd never replaced it. It was a reminder of where she'd been, of who'd saved her, of the promise she'd made to herself that first night in Raven's guest room with Tank sleeping at her feet and Bear's voice promising she wasn't alone anymore. The promise that she'd spend the rest of her life making sure no other child had to choose between freezing and surviving. That she'd be the kind of person who showed up. That she'd honor the family with the phoenix wings by making sure their wings covered as many children as possible. In Montana, in a house on the edge of Billings, Bear sat in his recliner with a blanket over his lap and the TV playing something he wasn't really watching. On the wall nearby hung a photo from that Christmas Day 17 years ago. 500 motorcycles surrounding a gas station, and in the center, a tiny girl in an oversized leather vest. His phone rang, Emma's number. Hey, baby girl, he answered. Just wanted to make sure you made it back to the hotel, okay, Emma said. And to tell you that you looking good up there today. Proud. I didn't do anything. Bear said, that was all Daisy. You gave her a reason to believe people could be good. Emma replied, that's not nothing, Dad. They talked for a few more minutes, the easy, comfortable talk of family that knows it has all the time it needs. After they hung up, Bear sat in the quiet of Raven's house and thought about Maggie, about the promise he'd made without knowing it, about the little girl who'd thrown herself in front of a bat because her mother had told her to look for phoenix wings. He thought about how one moment can change everything, how one choice to show up can ripple outward in ways you never imagine. His body hurt. He was 93 years old and his bones ached and his heart was tired. But his soul felt lighter than it had in decades because he'd kept the promise. He'd protected Maggie's daughter. He'd built something with Raven and Hawk and Emma and all the others that would outlive all of them. He'd shown up when it mattered. And in the end, maybe that's all any of us can do. Show up, be present, be the person that scared kids trust. Be family even when family is just a patch on a vest and a promise to not walk away. Outside snow was starting to fall again, Montana winter settling in for the long, cold months. But inside Raven's house, there was warmth. There was family. There was the legacy of a little girl's courage and an old biker's promise and 500 motorcycles that had shown up on Christmas Day. There was proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the world could be good, that people could be brave, that family wasn't about blood or paperwork or biology. Family was about who showed up when the bat was falling and you were too small to protect yourself. Family was about phoenix wings and promises kept and children who grew up to change the world because someone had changed theirs first. Family was about love that looked like leather and sounded like engines and felt like safety when you'd forgotten what safety felt like. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., in a hotel room overlooking the Capitol, a 25-year-old woman with a law degree and a mission looked at the phoenix on her vest and knew that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do, showing up for the next child who needed someone to see them, the next child who needed to know they weren't alone, the next child who needed family, even if family was just a stranger with wings on their back and a promise to keep them safe. Because that's what Maggie had taught her mother to tell her. That's what Bear had shown her was true. That's what she would spend the rest of her life proving to every child who needed it. Family is who shows up, and the people with the phoenix wings, they always, always show up.